Hello and welcome to the View from Sibos 2021 video series. This is the second year running that Swift's member conference will be held virtually. I'm Joy Macknight, editor of The Banker, and with me in the studio is Liz Lumley, The Banker's transaction banking and technology editor, to give a sneak preview of the hot topics in 2021. Liz, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you, Joy.
So what would you say are the major themes for Sibos this year?
Well, it's very interesting. They've got sort of four overarching themes, which they've called, things like banking on change and transformative technology, which makes a lot of sense. And then the third is managing risk, which I think is very Sibos, is very Swift. There's all these great technologies you can talk about, and of course, we're looking at the role of digital, going into the corporate banking sphere, going into the transaction banking sphere. But at the end of it, you have to think about risk. You have to think about how this affects the industry, how it affects the people using the banking products. And it all comes down to that sort of little bit cautious voice. So it's kind of an interesting four overarching themes that they're looking at. But if you want me to go into a little bit more detail, I go into more detail.
That's what I was going to ask you, yeah. And then also my second question was really around what you think are going to be the sort of the hot debates this year.
Well, I mean, I've seen this, and I'm glad they reflected in this, and I'm going to give it like a big name, the sort of fintech for good, right? So ESG investing has been around for a while, and it's mostly really, I've seen, probably wrong, it's about environmental issues, about green issues. There seems to be a renewed focus on corporate governance, and also looking to see how what you do as an organization impacts society. And those two factors, which are kind of, I know climate scientists will probably disagree with me, but the messier sides of the ESG, how to deal with people, how to deal with running that organization, that sort of strange, way that it might impact society at large. Those themes are coming out, and they're going to be discussed at Sibos. So I'm really interested to see how that moves on from there. And then also, as I mentioned before, how digital is just going into the transaction bank. Every corporate treasurer is also a consumer that has an iPad, that wants all the same stuff they have in their everyday life, in their working life. So there's a lot of panels that are going to discuss that as well.
Okay. And obviously you're a veteran of many physical Siboses in years past.
I have the broken feet.
And, is there any top tips actually that you can give attendees this year who are trying to navigate the virtual event?
Yeah, so I guess, Sibos virtual again. I mean, the thing that's interesting, this is a great opportunity because it's not like Europe was down for 2 years or the US was down. This was a global pandemic. And, just think if this had happened 20 years ago or 30 years ago, where we now live in a world where there's technology, where you can talk to someone on Zoom that's in another country and have those human interactions, even when we've been in various lockdowns in our homes for the past 2 years. So I understand people who say, "Oh, I wish I could sit down and have a beer with someone or have a coffee with someone," and that's fine. I think nothing really replaces that. But since we can't have that, what is being presented is a really great alternative. So I would say, when faced with a virtual event like the Sibos event, which will be virtual again this year, find all the panels that you want to see, watch them, but also interact with whatever communication and networking tools that they're offering you on that platform. Don't just think of it as sort of like watching a passive webinar that you can kind of pay attention to, even though you can get up and get yourself a coffee in your own time. But if you are craving that interaction, that serendipity, go into the networking apps, go into the communication, make comments that they allow ask questions and get that back and forth. And you'll be surprised kind of how starved people are for, having that connection, even if it is through a digital platform. There's also something I observed, which over the past 2 years, which is kind of interesting in terms of interaction and personalization. You have to understand, one, not everyone is an English speaker first language. Not everyone is an extrovert who likes standing up in the middle of a crowded auditorium and asking a question. And I've had feedback from people over the past 2 years watching virtual events and saying, I actually felt a lot more comfortable being able to ask my question in text than I would have if I had physically been in a room, where I would have felt a little intimidated or maybe not been sure of the language, but writing it down. So there's kind of an advantage to it being virtual, which maybe, people didn't think of before, which is kind of, including some people that might have felt excluded by, you've been to plenty of Siboses as well. It's a huge event. It's a bun fight, and that can be intimidating to people. So it's great to get industry discussions that are available to everyone. And if you have to do it on a virtual platform, then yeah, that sounds good.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much for your insights, Liz.
No worries.
You can read all the bankers' Sibos coverage in the September issue, but also you can watch, Liz will be doing a whole slew of View from Sibos video interviews, talking to the great and the good in the transaction banking world.